What is going on, everybody? We have one of my favorite CEOs in here, Tom Ulbrich, from New York. I'm happy to bring you on the podcast, talk about everything entrepreneurship, Goodwill, nonprofits, and so forth. To kind of give everybody a little bit about you, that 10-second elevator pitch or 30-second elevator pitch.
Sure. So, Ty, super glad to be here with you. I've always enjoyed my interactions with you, and glad to spend a little bit. But again, Tom Ulbrich, I'm President and CEO of Goodwill Western New York, and just super excited to be here. My background, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but is quite eclectic and varied, all the way from entrepreneurship to working in academia with entrepreneurship as the main topic in that area. But super excited to be here and happy to chat with you.
Yeah, 100%. So kind of bring us back to what got you started in entrepreneurship. I know I've read some stuff about you, so I kind of want to give your perspective on it.
Yeah, sure. So I think if you talk to most entrepreneurs, it starts really, really earlier in your life, from probably somebody in your family or a friend or somebody that you model after. And honestly, when I look back, my grandmother was probably my role model in entrepreneurship. Not that she was an entrepreneur herself, but she was, her family was in the jelly business, Brinkman Jellies, back in Jersey in the early 1900s. And she always talked about that. And then as she was growing up, she actually had a job on Wall Street when she was 16 years old, had a car early on, all this stuff back at the early time of autos and all that. And then I think learning that and being around it, I built an interest. And my dad and my mom had their own business. And I think you model and you learn from other people, from other role models in your life, see the opportunity. A lot of people, it starts with a newspaper route or a lemonade stand when you're a little kid, where you see that opportunity. Like, there's a customer, I have something they want, there's an exchange for that. It just sort of lights that fire in you.
No, 100%. I kind of talk about lemonade stand and kind of those things. That's how I got started when I was when I was super small, right? I would sell different different things to friends, family, and whatnot. But I 100% get where you're coming from on that side. And then I read you guys owned a tree farm. Is that correct?
Yeah. So that was, my dad was a forester by education and by trade. And we grew up in Dolgeville, New York, which is in the foothills of the Adirondacks. And he, at the time when I was a kid, which is a long time ago, managed the largest Christmas tree farm in New York State. He moved to Buffalo because my grandfather and grandmother were there, and started his own smaller tree farm, which grew into a garden center, landscape company, big water garden installation company. And I just found myself into the family business. That was one of my first, was my first job, actually. And I worked there for quite a long time. I went to college for a degree in ornamental horticulture, and that was my first job, was with my parents in the family business.
Very cool. Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see that being an entrepreneur, I had kind of the similar thing as well. My parents did some entrepreneur stuff. I think a lot smaller than what your guys definitely did, but they were flipping cars here and there. My mom ran kind of a way to, remember the frequent flyer miles where you get the actual. Yeah, so she used to buy those at let's say $100, and she would then resell them for $200, the actual physical tickets. So it's interesting to see that we kind of match up, and we've had similar experiences with the family having small businesses, and that's what kind of makes the United States. I feel like, just in general.
Oh, yeah, I just got done writing a blog post. It's not published yet, but about it was really about your company, your innovation entrepreneurs, tech-driven, venture capital, right? Which is critically important to our country. Able to scale quickly, but also has high risk, often tradable jobs that we can move out of the U.S. The flip side, the other side of entrepreneurship, is the solo entrepreneur or the mom and pop Main Street business. And I think you just nailed it. I'm always fighting to tell people, neither one is right or wrong. it's what you choose as an entrepreneur. And a lot of time, tech-driven entrepreneurship or innovation looks down on, the mom and pop small business. But the fact is that those are a hugely important part of our, economy. Over 60 million people work in a mom and pop business. It's a great example of representative entrepreneurship. Over 20% of small businesses are minority owned. Over half of them are women owned. So I'm glad you brought up, lifestyle entrepreneurship, I guess what we would call that, because it is equally important to innovation driven entrepreneurship. And it's important for me to always talk about that because people forget about it. And without those Main Street businesses, you and I wouldn't have a community. Those are the people that go to church with you, that coach your kids, that eat at the diner with you. Without those Main Street businesses and the people that make up our communities, we wouldn't even have communities, quite frankly.
No, 100%. And I even think it's even a stepping stone to like the bigger businesses like we talked about, right? Like kind of like the innovation driven. I know that's kind of where I started, right? It was more or less like flipping things. It's kind of like that solo entrepreneur kind of mentality. And then that's what taught me to then level up. You got like continuously put in the effort and put in all the resources back into the business to kind of learn, right? You then gather that knowledge. But I completely agree that that's a stepping stone, at least for me, that got through that innovation, being able to raise venture capital and so forth, because one, they know you can actually do the things that you right. said you have done, right? And you get the taste of it. I remember flipping the first item, right? It's like, oh, I buy this for $10, right? At maybe a local Goodwill, and I sell it for $20 on eBay, right? With eBay fees, I might make $7. But that kind of teaches that groundwork, which then becomes the catalyst to possibly growing a next Facebook or so. Or you can look at Zuckerberg, right? He built the first product. Someone wanted to buy it for $250,000. He just said no, but he built Facebook, right? And it's that innovation. You gotta love it.
Yeah, I think you make a great point because you do learn, right? And in academia, there's a concept that we refer to in entrepreneurship as 50,000 chunks of experience, that you'll be successful when you gain what you just talked about. All those little chunks of experience that give you really the gravitas or the proof that you're able to build something. And it's funny you said that. My first scalable business, the business I built and I sold, was I spun out of our garden center business. It was an e-commerce company that we were buying so many lawnmower parts for our own business. I went directly to some manufacturers, begged and for them to sell me some stuff directly. And we started a business and really made a catalog with a typewriter in my basement. And and just from there, sold a few products, which then scaled and became an e-commerce company. And to your point, where did I learn all that? I learned that from all those other little pieces along the way, right? So yeah, that's great examples that you're giving there about how one can lead to the other one.
No, yeah, I wanted to talk about more supplies. First of all, I like the name a lot. Yeah, kind of like, so you started with your in basement typing up the parts. So you started buying parts from the previous business. Where did that get you? And how many people do you have underneath you? What did that teach you? If you can give me like your 3 top lessons you learned, more supplies.
Yeah, I think that the first lesson I learned is, I think the best entrepreneurs are opportunity identifiers. You see a gap someplace and you're willing to step into the gap. You and I have talked before about risk, right? Taking, a risk, but entrepreneurs aren't gamblers. They see an opportunity and they mitigate that risk and go, all right, where am I at with this? So I have a 70% probability of success. And I know for a fact that, friends I've known and just observationally, I don't know too many gambler entrepreneurs that are successful. We all get it to a point where we feel we're comfortable and confident. So, one is, I think, identifying opportunities. 2 is testing a market. So making sure there's a customer that wants to buy it. Because a lot of times, again, a lot of entrepreneurs are idea people. They see these opportunities, but sometimes our best ideas, there's no market for them, right? So I was able to sort of lean in and test that with a small catalog that when I look back, I mean, we're talking before the internet, typewriter, cutting out pictures, pasting together, going to a printer and having a few copies printed. And then I get such a great response from it. It led me then to go directly to manufacturers. And of course, most manufacturers don't want to sell to some independent person, especially back then. What I did was really disrupt two-step distribution. In our business, manufacturers would sell to a dealer, dealers would sell to the landscaper or the end user. I skipped the dealers. It was not a very popular thing to do. Wasn't something that manufacturers want to be involved with. But I think that the third thing in here then is sales. Like I was able to sell myself to another salesman at a manufacturing facility to get that first $20,000 worth of parts, and then to parlay that into something bigger. We always ran a really, really small operation. We ran out of a warehouse that was about 4,000 square feet and just turned the thing like crazy, even as we grew. And I think the final lesson I learned, we never had more than half a dozen people, despite growing the business. But before we exited, I think the final lesson I say is know when your time is up. Meaning many entrepreneurs are good at starting things and scaling them to a level, but when they get to a certain size, they now require much more what I would call traditional management. And some of the best entrepreneurs in the world, I think, are really good at knowing when to step aside and start another business and turn over their business to management or to people that can manage those day-to-day operations. So that would be the last point, is just, make sure you know when it's time to turn it over, because we're often really good at managing the chaos of a startup, finding the money, finding the customers, pulling all the pieces together. Then we get bored once it starts getting routine. And I had actually left my business about, I want to think maybe 10 years before we sold it, and had gone off to university teaching entrepreneurship and was interested. I still own the business. I still was involved strategically, but wasn't running it day to day because again, an example of an entrepreneur maybe getting, I don't want to say burned out. It wasn't burned out. It was like, oh, there's another cool thing over here to play with.
100%. And that probably is even smart as well, right? It made it probably easier to sell the whole company because you've already taken yourself out of it, right? Investors or whoever, maybe private equity or whomever you sold to is like, okay, Tom's already made this a self-sustaining business. It's easier now to buy because we can just, he's not the face of it, right? Even though he probably was in the beginning. Now it's just, okay, we can take this, it's already running. Now we can either grow it, right? We can then put it into a different company. I wonder what happened to More Supplies.
Still exists. So
really,
it was purchased, and to the credit of knowing when the company that bought it has a bunch of smaller companies underneath an umbrella and applies their management across all of them, and they've really grown the business. And we decided to exit. Really, it was at a point where with e-commerce, we weren't, you have the person that started that's not really too interested and not there on a day-to-day basis. And it was going to require several $1 million of investment just to stay relative in the industry. No different than when I see what your company is doing, right? Technology was changing so quickly. Everything was changing, and I just wasn't committed enough. And fortunately, we had a buyer that sought us out and wanted to put it as part of their portfolio. And it's really exciting to see how they've grown the business. And they went on different channels. Like I was never on eBay, never on Amazon, and they've engaged in other channels and really grown the business from where it was. And it still exists under that same name.
Very cool. Very cool. I love, and it's a great to see success story too, because a lot of businesses fail, and not too many get acquired for an exit, especially something that started. I'm guessing you started with a very little amount of capital as well, correct?
Yeah, I started that business. I borrowed $10,000 from my dad. and paid them back over 3 years. I still have the little contract that we typed up on a piece of paper.
No, I love it. That's a true American success story, which I think it should give. If you probably seen Shark Tank dozens of thousands of times, right? It's kind of the same thing, right? When somebody has a win, it just shows you that it's doable. I think that's the biggest thing to tell everybody that's going to watch this. Maybe the new entrepreneurs that come into a Goodwill to buy the product to flip, right? It's possible to kind of build whatever you want and take the American dream to its farthest extent.
Yeah, I think, again, you're dead on about that. You're identifying a really important thing with entrepreneurship, which sometimes scares me about our country as entrepreneurial as we are. We've lost a bit of that first generation, those grinder entrepreneurs, right? There's a big focus on let's make an app and try to hit it big, and that's cool. That's all good. But it's having those role models and seeing people that have done it. And you're also seeing, women entrepreneurs, minority entrepreneurs finally starting to catch up because I believe they trailed a lot just because they didn't have a lot of role models. Now they do. There's more and more people that are successful. So it is important to our country, our economy, to have those people, whether it's a little exit, a big exit, or everything in between. An exit's an exit, right? And it shows that somebody can make something out of nothing, really.
100%. Yeah. I've seen like some of our like team that's like first generation is probably the hardest working by far because they had to like deal with one of our mechanical engineers, there's Carlos. He had to like 70s from Mexico and he's first generation here. He had to like fight for chicken in like fields with this like grandpa, right? Like with like the whole team around there. It's basically how fast you can grab the food. The story tells it's interesting, and you can see the hard work that he puts in. It's incredible there. He actually is going out to the Navy to be a nuclear engineer.
Wow.
Couldn't keep him in. We tried, but he wanted to go to the nuclear side. But I completely agree on women and minority. They have some incredible opportunity coming up as well.
Yeah, and they're building some incredible businesses too. Some crazy cool businesses. So it's all good.
100%. And then, so one thing I am jealous about, first and foremost, it is your TEDx appearance 11 years ago. There's a better way. Kind of give you the background of that. I've watched hundreds and thousands of TEDx's. I actually watched yours as well. But how did you get into TEDx and what was the inspiration behind it?
Yeah, so that just happened when I was at the university. Probably not my best presentation. I was early on in presentation days. But I think the topic is really important. So my thinking was, is there a better way? And really the better way was that in this world of rapidly changing technology, which I did that 11 years ago. Now, technology is changing even faster. And it's just so rapid, the technological change. The premise of my thinking was that eventually, what you're learning in school, a lot of it, unless it's hard science that never changes, is by the time you learn it, it's no longer relevant. So really the skills that we need to be successful in this rapidly changing world are those of innovation or problem identification, problem solving. So the premise of TED Talk is, why aren't we teaching that in school from kindergarten on? Why is not innovation and creative problem solving the sort of like underlying framework for what we teach kids today? Because the fact is, as human beings, we are naturally creative. We are born creative beings. And guess when we begin to beat it out of us? School. And of course, you have to have rules. We can't all be running around doing what we want to do. And that's part of it. I'm not being fully negative against the school system. I understand why it happens, but we slowly make everybody the same, make everybody, homogenous, when it's really the differences. And we talk today about diversity, but we have to talk about diversity in thinking. We have to talk about diversity in learning. We have to talk about all aspects of diversity, because the records show that diverse teams come up with the best solutions. And I mean diversity in all aspects. So back to the TED Talk. that was all about, like, why aren't we thinking about this early on and making this part of the curriculum of is basically the themes of entrepreneurship, which are about innovation and creative problem solving. Let's start that from day one with kids and bake that in, because in today's world, you can solve just about any problem if you can find the information, you know how to get it, if you know what the real problem is. A lot of times we don't even know how to identify a root cause of a problem, and what we think is a problem has nothing to do with what the problem is. So learning all those skills, I think, could be, and still believe, could be critically important for our future, in the U.S. and across the world.
No, completely agree. I think one thing on that same topic as well, do you know what Ed Astra is?
No.
So Elon Musk, I'm a big Elon Musk fan. I know we talked a little about him as well. Kind of the best entrepreneur of our generation, my personal opinion. But he created a school, Ed Astra, for his kids, and it did exactly what you're talking about. Basically, like critical learning and following what they think is interesting, right? So like even the best of our minds nowadays is thinking the exact same thing that you did. He says the one downside is wish he would have continued it throughout high school, because it was just until middle school. And then they put him into like public or probably private school, put his kids in private school until then, just to get some more learning. But it was for all of his like wealthy, I guess you could say, friends, kids. So it's fascinating that your topic actually was applied in a certain way.
Yeah, it's cool. Another really, I think, forward thinker is Peter Diamandis. I don't know if you follow him at all, but he's started all the X Prizes. Real interesting guy. So check him out. But he talks a lot about technological change. He's got a really cool, interesting background too.
Awesome. No, I definitely will. And it kind of on that changing the way people think in your realm of the nonprofits. How can that be tied into how maybe you believe people can use that thinking to push nonprofits, especially like the Goodwills of the world, push them forward into innovating quick and being able on the top of innovation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I know a lot of Goodwills that are very innovative, which is, and what's nice is we get to share with each other too, which is fantastic. But one of the things we try to build into our Goodwill is to bring in some best business practices into a nonprofit, meaning things like really clear vision, really clear goals. Where are we going? Building a culture of accountability. And I always say accountability with constant coaching. I don't mean accountability like we run around and we scream at everybody, but I often find in nonprofits that people are afraid of accountability. Like we want to just sit back and again, my thinking about doing this is around the more quote unquote profitable. Of course, a nonprofit doesn't have a profit, but the better we can do our business, the more good work, the more mission work we can do in the end. So we've tried to bake a lot of those principles into our Goodwill. And I also see, I just am working on the final pieces of an article for Forbes Nonprofit Council. I also have this crazy vision in my mind of nonprofits becoming more entrepreneurial. So I call it the entrepreneurial nonprofit. Like they need to, so they're less dependent on grants and can be more self-sustaining. While I see for-profits, and I don't want anybody to think I'm an anti-capitalist with what I'm about to say, because I'm not, but for-profits baking in more of what I'll call social, more things about people and planet into the work that they do. So not just profit, but the triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit. So I sort of see down the road of this merging of the two, thinking that social entrepreneurship someday may be closer to what most nonprofits and for-profits look like down the road. I know that statement. There's going to be some people who are like, this guy is crazy. Like the for-profit world, like just let it work. It works. Well, it does work and we should let it work, but there's a thing called market failures too. where things don't always work out. And there needs to be some checks and balances built in. And I think your generation, the younger generation, is really demanding this of businesses. So you're seeing it already starting to happen.
Yeah. Not even just for like the consumer side. I think it's even for like internal side, right? I go back to the Elon Musk because I think he's excellent at what he does. But like, look at all of his, let's call it 3 businesses or even 4 businesses or 5. He has tons of it at this point. But like Tesla, right? It's like the same to accelerate the sustainability, right? That's number 1. To go to Mars is number 2 for SpaceX. You can even see like X is for free speech. He kind of ties that in, and that brings great people to him. Because in the end of the day, you probably know better than most. It's about the people in the business, right? Isn't it just not about the pure founder? It's about who you bring in and how they come together in a shared mission and shared goal.
No question. In my opinion, the only competitive advantage any business has are their people. You nailed it. Like attract and retain and build up the best possible team you can, and you'll get that back tenfold any IP that you have, in my opinion. And intellectual property is a great competitive advantage temporarily, but technology is changing so quickly that often a patent or some type of really cool technology is overrun much quicker than it was 20 or 30 years ago. I don't know these stats. I can't remember exactly, but I remember reading an article about stents, heart stents, and how short their shelf life is on the market today compared to what was, because there's a new one that will come out that does something a little bit better. Maybe has a medication built in, whatever it is. So, the real competitive advantage, I agree with you, is your people, and, attracting and retaining talent is probably the number one thing any leader should be focused on.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the right talent is the kicker, right? Like, try to find the people that are going to fit best in the org, right? Everybody might not be perfect for the org and whatnot, but not finding who fits that puzzle piece, and more or less. Rather wait and hire a great talent. Even Henry Ford said something pretty interesting. He would rather pay a higher dollar amount for A+ talent because the return on that dollar amount is so much higher. So even a 2+ win, right? Like, if you can hire the best talent and pay them more, they're going to give you a outsized return for whatever you do, whatever they do inside the company.
Yeah, that's actually one of GE's mantras used to be, right? Less people being paid more, and the productivity goes up. You have a happier team, and we really ascribe to that here at Goodwill, trying to pay top dollars for talent. So when we look at our wages and stuff here, we don't compare ourselves to other nonprofits. We're comparing ourselves to other for-profits, because that's the talent that we're competing for. We're trying to make sure we have a pay-for-performance culture, and we're trying to make sure that we're benchmarking to top talent in our community, not just, in one sector, but where are we going to find the top talent? And again, I think it's super important. And to your point, right talent, right time. As companies grow, we were just talking about this here at our Goodwill. One of the hardest things for a leader, I think, to do is when you're growing rapidly, you can outgrow your talent. And you either have to your point of developing people, you either have to identify people that you can develop internally and give them the development opportunities they need to come along with you, or sometimes you have to bring in new people at different levels. Those often happen, 3 million, 5 million, 7, 10, 50 million. And I can tell you, even me as a CEO, you don't want me running a $500 million company. I've never done it. It's a different skill set. And you probably don't want a CEO from a $500 million company running a $3 million company, because they have no clue. They know how to run an organization with structure, but they have no clue what it would be like, the sort of, I don't want to say chaos, but there's a bit of chaos in a smaller business where you're flipping on and off many different hats.
Yeah, you got to have top ahead. Small businesses are definitely a lot of chaos, right? Just by the nature of it, trying to find product market fits. again, normally you got to wear multiple hats across the board. I know personally, like even some on talking on like raising like the people, some of our best people are hired as like usually interns, and then we bring them up to be actually one of our engineers. We brought him full time. Hired him as a mechanical engineer intern, and then we brought him up. He's amazing, right? You kind of help feed that that growth from that, or like you said, hire top tier talent that's gonna kind of get you there as well.
Yeah, and again, what you just stated there, I'm like you, I never stopped learning. So I'm thinking back to Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great, and he talks about right people, right seats, doing the right things right. So often, I love your concept here about an intern or somebody coming in that way, because often you don't have a wrong person or a bad person. They're just not in the right seat for what their skill sets are, right? And that gives you an opportunity to really identify what's the right seat for young talent that you're evaluating. And it's often really hard to do off of a resume to see them in action.
Yeah, 100%. And you kind of touched on Jim Collins. What's your favorite entrepreneurial book?
So my favorite book of all time is Scaling Up by Vern Harnish. So, Vern takes strategy and really takes what I believe can be a very complex and overburdened subject and simplifies it to an actionable strategy that teams can operationalize and live out every single day. And, I think a lot of strategies become these big, giant 3-ring binders that people hire consultants for and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. And those 3-ring binders go up on a shelf, never to be pulled off again until, a year later you dust it off and you look at it. And the way I like that Vern Harnish approaches strategy is really it's about execution. And how do you execute on that strategy? Because the best ideas in the world are meaningless without execution. And that's by far my favorite go-to book. And it's written in such a way you don't need to read it cover to cover. You know how many business books you read and you're like, oh man, I could have read the first chapter and the last page. In the middle is the same junk everybody tries to make a book. It is more like almost like a reference guide. You can, if you want to talk, find some information about cash, go to the cash section. If you want to talk about execution, go to the execution section. You can just pull out what you need when you need it. Reminds me a lot of Tim Ferriss's writing, where he writes a big book with all the chapters you can flip through and read anywhere, and you get value out of it.
Very cool. I'll actually put that to my list. Scaling up. Awesome. I'm a big audio person. My favorite by far would probably be, as of today, 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. Have you read it before?
No, I know Peter Thiel, but I've not read that. Yeah.
Check it out. It's interesting. Basically, it says like that innovation it's like 0 to 1. Basically, the only way to get to 1 is with innovation. You can go from like 1 to 1 by doing like globalism, basically reproducing it around the world. But only way to actually move forward as a country or a business, you have to innovate on what you do. It's a really good book.
Yeah, and back to Elon Musk, it just made me think of something. I just saw a post that he put up that I'd shared with my team about innovation, and he talks about if you're not constantly removing 10% and replacing it with something new, that you're not moving quick enough. The process of innovating, it's interesting. I'll check that book out.
Definitely. And then on innovation, what do you think can be innovated inside the Goodwill sphere in terms of, let's say, processes, or what are you seeing as some gaps that entrepreneurs can come in and help out on that side?
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity, the type of work that you're doing, right? We handle a lot of products. So how do you speed up the process of sorting through that product? Lots of Goodwill's working on that. Lots of companies like you working on that. But I think, how do you do more with less using technology? The sorting process, listing process, tagging process, all that into things. I think there's a huge opportunity with artificial intelligence, although, especially I think on the, when you think of Goodwill, I think people in Buffalo we're fighting this sort of image of like, oh, we're just clothing store. Well, no, we're social enterprise, and the clothing stores are a revenue generator. Our real mission is workforce development, and we train people for careers in tech and careers in advanced manufacturing. And we're not there yet, but we're starting to look at how can we use artificial intelligence to speed up the training. A lot of our training is very people intensive, and I don't know how yet, but we're looking at, I've challenged a team. How do we 10X our work? How do we take and 10X our work without adding more people? And that's going to be with technology. And I think artificial intelligence is so early, but I also think 24 months from now, it's going to be so normal that if you're not paying attention, we're just most concerned about setting up the structure in a way that we don't expose, by accident, individuals' information to a big data models. It's just in practice, how do we use it properly and put the safety guidelines in? So I think that's an area for innovation. And then the other big one, a lot of people don't talk about, but our business is really, in my opinion, a lot of our business, I always think this is a logistics business. We have so many donation sites, so much coming to us. I think there's lots of opportunity to innovate in logistics. So on-site processing versus central processing, perhaps. Electric fleets. I don't, again, really early in my thinking on this stuff, but lots of opportunity for innovation inside of Goodwill's. In another area you and I talked a little bit about that I want to, be careful about, but I think there's a huge opportunity. Some of our biggest customers at Goodwill are resellers. And there's this, I'm not going to call it a love-hate relationship. Maybe the resellers would, but I call it a balance. We have, me as a CEO, my job is to maximize the donors' value, the value of the donor's donation, so I can take that money and put it back into workforce development. A reseller's job is to make sure that they're maximizing their profit, right? So they want that arbitrage. They want to buy something as least expensive as they can. So as far as innovation, I can't help but thinking there must be some ways that we could figure out how to work more closely together, so everybody lifts the boat together. So I've been thinking a lot about that. Could we perhaps embed, build areas for resellers that maybe only are doing this out of their house? Could we build labs for them where they can actually work within our stores in a cooperative manner where go ahead, shop the store, buy what you want, and use our facility to list your product? So just trying to think about how we might work together, because we both have a need. And I think we both have something to bring to the table that we could innovate something really cool together. We think about it.
No, 100%. Like, obviously, I know a lot of the resellers in the community. Somebody doing something cool down in Houston as a reseller. What he's doing is he's going into your Apple locations and he's actually picking product and then does it on Whatnot, and then he sells that product on Whatnot, which is like a video platform. And then what doesn't sell, he carries no inventory, right? And then he puts it back in the bins.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And he broke his best month ever. I think he did like 400,000 in top line revenue. Yeah. And it's a fascinating business model, and it carries no risk for the reseller. I think that's a very cool one, obviously. But I love the idea of like having resellers in there and being more cooperative, because they might be able to pick great stuff, and then that might be a symbiotic relationship pretty easily.
I think there's opportunity in what you just described. There is a very interesting. I've not heard that. So what I'm hearing you say, they're doing it live in the store, so they have no risk of purchasing inventory, right? Now, our policies today, we would probably freak out with somebody sitting there with the camera live streaming, right? That's a great opportunity. Like, how do you work together to modify our policies to say, okay, maybe there's an area that you set up that allow them, because the other challenge you have too is we have to balance too the everyday customer often sees resellers because they're good at what they do and they feel like, oh, I didn't have an opportunity. So you have to be careful that we don't have side relationships with resellers that are preventing everyday customers from obtaining equal chance at products, right? But to your point, if we had a little room or something set up, yeah, go ahead, pick through the whole store, stream what you want, put back what you don't. That's a really interesting opportunity right there for both of us.
Yeah, 100%. Even if you do like a profit share, that would be fascinating.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And there's some cool stuff you can do down the road on that side. And talking about on your kind of vision, I completely agree with how you kind of structure that, like the logistics down to processing, and then even down to the salvage side. I think if I could wave a magic wand tomorrow, and this is kind of our long-term 10, 20-year vision, is being able to get items, being closest to the donor. That's really winning right now. Because I'll take a step back. The reason why that's a thought process, because when I used to do reselling, I went to reselling and I did downsizing in the States and I did arbitrage between marketplaces. The reason why I went to the States is because in downsizing, is that's where the product was coming from. That's why the 4Ds, right? That's disaster, downsize, and divorce. That's how all product gets donated. That's how all product gets in the resell food chain. I was like, how can I go upstream to do those estates? And that's when I started dabbling in like $1 million paintings, right? So the value became a lot larger. I think 100%. How can you become closest to the donor and then being able to process all that stuff at a large scale? E-commerce, retail, salvage. And on the salvage side, what can you do with that? I know my vision is how can you get it and build out infrastructure overseas where people are buying the product. Because product sells in Egypt for $10, the exact same price it sells to the United States. So there's a huge arbitrage there. Right now it's going between 4 or 5 different vendors. That's kind of like the 10, 20-year vision if we can get it done.
No, I think it's a cool vision. I think what big organizations have to worry about, right? The bigger we get, any organization gets, the slower you can move. And I think the thing I always think about is those really dangerous words that no leader ever wants to hear, no good leader or entrepreneurial leader. And that's, we've always done it this way, right? And I think the bigger you are, the more likely is that a board or a leadership team or somebody is going to just say, we can't do that. We've always done it this way. And we have to be very open to what may at first sound like, well, that's a crazy idea. How are we going to let somebody grab product and stream it in our store without upsetting everybody? Instead of starting from no, start with yes, and how are we going to do that, right? Instead of going, no, we can't. Let's start with yes and figure out how we might. And you don't always figure it out, but if you start from that mindset, I think everybody is more successful in the end. And also, the bigger we are, the more we have to worry about that for sure. Because it's easy to get stuck with, that overly protective boardroom mentality that entrepreneurs often don't worry about so much. And that's what makes them successful. But big companies, it paralyzes them.
No, 100%. Like you kind of see it in every industry, right? The Blockbuster versus the Netflix. Blockbuster had a chance to buy Netflix for, I think it was like $10 million, right? Would have been the purchase of the century. But like and also some people are so good at changing as well. Look at Google. Google's been here for a decent amount of time now, and they're quick moving and innovative as well. I think it's like those two mentalities, like said, like that boardroom mentality. How do you become the yes and kind of person? That's when you can start gaining ground fast as well.
Yeah, I think Blockbuster is if I remember the story right, I used to do the case with my students at MBA course, and I might have it a little off, but if I remember right, their decision to stay the course was about the board didn't want to give up the late fees. Their business model was late fees. So that gave them the inability to think about, again, we've always done it this way, and without late fees, how the heck are we going to make any money, right? And here you had the next version of that. Netflix was already figuring that out. And and starting to think about it. And, there you go. Missed opportunity for sure.
Very cool. I actually didn't know what late fees. That's really cool. I'll use that from now on. And then you just talked about your master's when you were teaching masters. Kind of give us that snippet. We have about 10 minutes left. A snippet of what got you into become a professor in school, and what did it teach you? Give us some lessons on that side.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. What got me into the field was I was very involved with National Federation of Independent Business in New York State. On the leadership team of that organization for the state, lobbying for small business needs. So long story short, I was passionate about that and thought, gee, why don't I go become an elected official and I can lobby for all these needs that I think small businesses have. I ran for office, got destroyed, but the university had a Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership, which led me to speak to them about executive director role there, which was really supporting small businesses. And that was sort of my entree into the university. And one thing led to another. And I, eventually became a clinical professor for entrepreneurship in the School of Management. Then I started working on this concept of the entrepreneurial nonprofit and had a joint appointment with the School of Management and the School of Social Work on this concepts of social innovation. That's how I was there for 12 years. I loved it. Got talked into this crazy opportunity at Goodwill. But really, the entrepreneur, they tricked the entrepreneur by saying, you talk about it inside the university, why don't you come out and do it in the real world? Because here's this organization. And I did. But what I learned at the university, learned a couple things. One is, you don't know much of anything. And if you're really smart, you'll be a continuous learner for the rest of your life. So even as a professor, every time I walked in and out of a classroom, I learned something from my students. I think that's number one important thing. Number two is you can't teach entrepreneurship out of a textbook. You have to teach entrepreneurship by doing. So how do you give students the opportunity to think about building a business or through a project or whatever it is? Because the fact is, there is no one way to become an entrepreneur. There's a million different ways. Sure, are there some premises or some ways we can teach you to think about business, like customer discovery that you should know how to do? All those type of things, absolutely. But a lot of entrepreneurship is psychological. So that would be the third thing that I found to be really important is by the time I left, I was showing TED Talks by Brene Brown about wholeheartedness, trying to show the students, like, listen, this is what it's about. You need to be a human first, and you'll only be a successful entrepreneur, not when you're a greedy pig at the trough, but when you are listening to your customers and understanding not what you want, but what they need and what it is to be a human being and what problem you're solving for another human being, then you'll be successful. So those are all things I took away. And one of the main reasons I wanted to do this with you when you reached out, and one of the reasons I started a newsletter I miss that interaction with other entrepreneurs and students. I get some of it. My team's super entrepreneurial. A lot of Goodwill CEOs are entrepreneurial, but I'm not like buried in it day to day. And there's a lot to be learned from entrepreneurs. And again, Michael Dell used to say the most successful businesses have that culture of continuous learning. You become a continuous learning business is the way that you can be the most successful. So I try to go in, feet first with that all the time.
No, love it. Love it across the board. That's the reason why I like talking to you as well, right? It's like the entrepreneur mentality. Not everybody has it. I think it's small, select few people. As of today, hopefully we can teach more and more people with like what you did at college, more and more about the entrepreneurial tasks and becoming an entrepreneur. Because I think it's going to grow continuously, especially the more kind of, I'm not sure the correct word is democratized, but basically everything's becoming easier to get started now. But I completely agree. And you talked about, we got 5 minutes left. Someone hit the newsletter. So everybody, we'll have a link. I hope we can send me a link after this. We'll put a link in this for the newsletter. Kind of give everybody what you talked about on the newsletter. And it has 1,200 people on it so far.
Yeah. So I was working with someone that encouraged me to share some of what you have, right? In your head up there. So I was like, I don't think it's that useful. I mean, everybody knows it already. And what I realized was I was wrong. And the first day we released the newsletter, we had over 800 subscribers the first day. And it's been slowly building. I think we put out 7 issues so far. So what do we talk about? We talk about entrepreneurship. We talk about social innovation. We talk about real stuff. So I try to be, without oversharing, you know how I hate when people overshare, but I try to be real and transparent and use some real examples from my life in the newsletter and to share with people, not just the aspects of doing business and being an entrepreneur, but the emotional part of business and being a leader and being an entrepreneur. Another thing I talk a lot about is leadership and how important leadership is in our world and how hard it is to be a good leader too. So we share all that. I would love for people to chime in. You know what? It's one of those things. There's no hidden agenda. I'm not trying to sell anything. There's nothing attached to it. It's just free information that I'm hoping other people will want to, share with other people. And maybe somebody gets inspired, because there's nothing more inspiring to me like when I get a call from a student that says, "Hey, Professor Ulbrich, do you remember me from blah, blah, blah? I want you to know I launched the business and I've done X, Y, and Z." That's what jazzes me, is when other people see the power of entrepreneurship and how it can change your life, where the freedom it can give you. Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, it's got its ups and downs. Yeah, you're going to fail. But in the end, if you're persistent, you got that dogged determination, you're going to have the opportunity to live a life you never dreamed about. And you're going to be able to focus on your purpose and your passion and why you're on this earth at a level that other people never, ever get to embrace. So that's why I do it all.
Awesome. Yeah. So everybody that's listening to this, click that link and sign up. We have 2 minutes left. Any comments, questions, anything from you that you want to talk about in the last 2 minutes?
No, I just want to say thanks. I enjoyed our time together. I always look forward to our conversations, whether it's on a conference floor or, via Zoom call. I look forward to continuing to work with you in your company, and just thankful to be invited. So thanks.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for coming as well. I appreciate your time.
Take care.